Hello. Hello, everyone. I'm just getting ready here. A bit of a impromptu live stream. Hadn't really planned on doing one today, but decided, what the hell? Why not? Why not? I mean, realistically, I'm only going live because Jamie and Mr. Super told me that I had to. So, blame them. Today, what is this Volare I am, or Volare? Hey, how's it going, everyone? Today, we're going to do a cheeky little live review of the new. I don't know if it's like officially released but it's been announced. But it's new. The IO Audio Volare. It's gonna be a live stream review, and so yeah, take that with a grain of salt. This is not with a ton of time put into these, but this is with me having basically spent, the better part of a week listening to them and comparing them to other stuff, and then also measuring them. This is the IM right here. Right. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the Volare, and then I figure we can talk about some other headphones. If you guys have some headphones that you guys want to discuss, let me know in the chat. And then after that, we'll get into Q&A and spicy hour. So let us get started. And there's nobody else on the stream today. It's just me and a couple of I see a few folks are trickling in. Let me just actually, before getting too far ahead of myself, let me just let the people know. All right. This is the out of nowhere live stream. Jamie, Joel, how's it going? Yeah, see, I'm doing this because Jamie told me to. He told me I had to. So that's why we're doing it. Okay, let's talk about the Volare. Now, okay, you could say Volare or you could say Volare. I don't know what is more correct, but I do know that there is a song called Volare. And so I feel like Volare is the right way to say it, but somebody let me know if you know how to pronounce these. Yeah, Jamie, this was I wasn't planning on doing a live stream, but again, because you guys bullied me into doing it, I am now doing one. I was actually originally planning on doing one last night, and then I woke up this morning and was like, nah, I don't really feel like it. I didn't have like that much of a topic. I was thinking, oh, I could do a backlog, but then what do I have in my backlog? It's actually stuff that I just can't talk about yet. So other than this one, right? This has been released. And then I think there's like the Dolce, which is sitting over there, and there's one of the Zagats, but those will wait for another stream. I realized I try and do too many at once, and this one isn't going to be a live impressions. I've already put time into this one, so I feel pretty good about my impressions of it. But just one second. This is this is the box, the outside of the box. I'll get to more of the box in a second because that it really matters with this one. But this is the frequency response on the back. There you go. Now you notice a couple things. One is that the channel matching isn't perfect on their sample here. I think that's kind of funny, but that's okay. Oh wait, no, hold on. It says blue is the BNK 4195. Okay, so these are actually on two different rigs, but it looks like it's channel matching because it's red and blue. So that's just funny. I think they should maybe switch the color around, but because people are going to assume that that's channel balance, but it's not. I found that actually this is incredibly well balanced for the channel matching on this is insanely good. It's like one of the best that I've seen almost ever. So that's why I was a bit surprised to see that. But just so you guys can see once again, you get the Gross in red, right? So for people who want the Gross stuff, that's in red. Now, I'm going to be showing you guys measurements on the 5128, which is the one that has the more accurate acoustic impedance. So the one that they used does not. So that's still 711, I believe. Just with like maybe a couple of other features. But I'm not entirely sure what the 4195 is. So if somebody wants to let me know what that one is, 4195Q. And it's not the first I've heard of it, but certainly the Gross 45CA is one that we're all very familiar with. Okay. If they wanted to be a little misleading, red and green, make the green be the better looking line. Okay. Yeah, 4195 is just their 711. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's what I assumed, but I wasn't sure. Okay. So let me just quickly talk about the what you get in the box, because like this is, I think, actually one of the key things to highlight with this IEM. For reference, this one I believe comes in at around $599, $499, $599. I think something like that. Don't quote me exactly. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure, but I believe it's somewhere around there, so it's fairly high end. But this is the. Now, it looks like no acoustics, but I'm calling it IO acoustics because I'm pretty sure that's what it's supposed to be. This one was also provided by Shenzhen Audio. $600? Okay, yeah, exactly, $599. This one was provided by Shenzhen Audio, so thanks to Shenzhen Audio for sending it in for review. Of course, they didn't pay me or anything like that. But for the unboxing experience... Oh, by the way, I do not get to keep this. That's a thing maybe people don't realize, is I don't get to keep the review units. That's not how I do that. But with the unboxing experience, pardon me, you get this enormous case. I prefer smaller cases, to be honest, but this is it's a nice case, right? It's very big, right? But then you get all the things. You get a drawers full of stuff, right? These are all the different tips. Let me just pop this up. I don't want to tilt it too much because they will fall. But you get like a ton of different tips. And I measured it with as many as I could. I didn't measure with the foams because they're just foams, but all the rest of the ones I did. And I'll show you guys that in a minute. But then you also get, for the cable, it does come with the different terminations that you might want. So whether that's a 6.35 or 2.5, 3.5, etc. And then here you get the adapter and then a bunch of the documentation. But I just wanted to highlight that, like, in an era where, you know, IEMs are coming out with like 3 tips, like the Dusk, you also have stuff like this coming out with just like all the things, all the accessories. And on that note, the cable is exceptional. At least I find it to be very, very nice. Like, it's a very high quality looking and feeling cable. This is not a chin cinch. This is just me having wrapped the Velcro around. So that is one thing. Oh, it's up here. There we go. Feels great. I quite like this cable. And then the termination here, it is, if I can do this, I'm using the 3.5. If I can take this off. Nope, there we go. It's kind of like a twisty bit. You unscrew the little piece and then it pops off. So I want to pop it back on and then I screw it back on. As far as you can remove the part in the case so you can fit it with the cable, but it's not very clear. Yeah, I noticed that at first as well. I was like, what the hell? Like, how am I supposed to actually even be able to put these in? Because if you look at it, it's got this in it, right? But you can actually fit the cable in, as Jamie's saying. Yeah. As far as the driver configuration here, it is, as someone's saying here, a tribrid. I believe it has 4 ESTs, which is, I've seen this in a couple of different places. Let me just double check that it's actually 4. Yeah, so it's 1 dynamic driver, 8mm dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures, and then 4 imported Denmark Sonic ESTs. The 4 imported Denmark Sonic is something I've not seen before. Maybe somebody let me know what is going on there. But they say that for diaphragm material for the dynamic driver, it's silicon, rubber, and wood dome. I'm wondering if this is biocellulose, if that's what they're talking about, but I'm not sure. Anyways, I've seen other IMs in the past that have the 4 ESTs, and they often haven't been great in the treble. But this one is a lot more sensible. By the way, let's just hold that up so you guys can see what it looks like. I should do the ergonomics in the shell and all that stuff. This is the benefit of doing everything live, unprepared. If my nozzle thing works. I'll measure the nozzle size for you guys, because that matters a lot. Nozzle at the... So there's 5.5 millimeters, but then at the widest point, it's a little bit wider than that, actually. It is 5.9 at the widest end, roughly 6 millimeters, a little bit over 6 millimeters at the widest end. And then what I wanted me to do is the other way. The nozzle length is actually only 3.5 millimeters from the contour of the shell. So it's a wide, shallow nozzle, if that makes sense. But I don't find these to be... I don't have any issues with the comfort or the fit of these. They contour nicely. It's... I don't have trouble with these the way that I did with the Singolo and some of the other ones that I've been testing recently. I do think, though, that is going to have an impact on, the fit for people and ultimately the sound, because if it sits too shallow, you're going to end up with more energy in a certain region of the treble than you may want. And that with these, it's already quite present, and so that I would be cautious of. If you have, small ear canals, this one might be one to be wary of. For the overall sound signature and the tuning, let me actually... This is quite interesting to me. So it's Harman-like, but not exactly Harman. It is Harman adjacent. Like, imagine Harman, but then like with again some of the issues that Harman has as well. And I say Harman in the sense that it has a dip in the lower mids, and it has a bit of excess energy in the treble. But it's not in a way, it's not quite to the same degree as what you might find with certain other IEMs that are more significant for these features. And I also find that it does change quite a bit depending on the tips, and I'll show you guys that in a second. You hunger the graphs. You find they fit really well for you, Jamie? Wait, VSG, you were told not to say anything about this until April 15th? I was not told this, so... There's already... Like, a guy has already reviewed them. It's out on YouTube already, so I figured that's not an issue. Let me just double check that nobody told me not to say anything about this. Either way, I already have, so... No, nothing. I have no... There is nothing in my DMs about this saying April 15th. So, I cannot be blamed. If they don't tell you, you can't be, it's not... You can't be at fault. Go straight for the barrel, man. Who's stopping you? Okay. Let's go to the graphs. And I'm going to show you guys this first relative to Harman. So again, I measured this on the BNK 5128, which is not compatible with Harman IE, right? Now, there's been new research that Sean is working on, and I don't have the new Harman IE for the 5128 here because that's one of the things that he's trying to do. But I have sort of my internal Harman over-ear target that I've been using, which is basically the 2018 filters that have been. Pardon me. This is going to be a bit annoying. Come on, you stupid. Okay. So basically, it is with the 2018 filters with the 3 kilohertz adjustment. So, and I feel we can talk a little bit more about this, but I feel the 3 kilohertz adjustment is a requirement. It really matters. It's in the actual curves that exist, even though it wasn't part of the official research that was done. And I think it's worth including. But so that's what I'm going to show you guys here is against my sort of internal Harman over ear target. And with the reason I'm showing it like this is because with Harman, with the new 5128, there is a chance that we don't actually need 2 different targets. And so if this is the over ear target, which again, it might not be, I basically just ripped their beta target from the presentation that they did, which is based on the 5128 diffuse field head related transfer function with their filters applied. It's just that they probably are they're probably applying the official filters, not an interpretation of them. And then I requested had the 3 kilohertz range adjusted accordingly. And so you can see relative to this, I would say it measures reasonably well. So like the bass, I think the bass is like incredibly punchy on this one. Like, yes, it's elevated. It's a bit strong, but man, it's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of like that Dunu Glacier, where the bass is just this really strong, prominent, dare I say thunderous kind of sound that you get. Very distinct as well. And then your mids are a bit lean. This I don't bother too much about because this can change depending on the individual a bit. But it's, for the upper mids, it's a bit forward there for me. And then because of my HRTF and my pinna effects, this is definitely too much treble for me as well. So this would be closer to Harman IE if measured on the Gross relative to Harman IE as well, but not quite. I think Harman IE is actually a little bit more even still in certain places, but for other places it'd be pretty similar. But then interestingly, for the rest of the treble, it again follows with this Harman tuning. Now I'll just show you guys this relative to JM1, which is the population average that we're using here. Population average for the pinna effects estimated, and then with the canal, with the approximated canal transfer function as well. And what this is basically the population average response with the 2018 filters applied as well, including the 3 kilohertz adjustment. So this is, in my mind, the better response, and this is what I think IEMs should shoot for. If people have pinna effects that are on the brighter end, then the other one might be more preferable. But given the information from ISO 11-1904, I think it is. Correct me if I'm wrong, Joel. From Hammershoy and Mahler, it would suggest that this is the more appropriate response in the treble for pinna effects. Plus, again, this is plus with 2018 filters. I think it would be plus 2.4. I can't remember exactly, but anyways, it's definitely brighter relative to population average and leaner. And so this is when I say, in the same vein that Harman is brighter and leaner, this is also brighter and leaner. At the same time, the bass is a bit more, it has a bit more gumption. Let's just say that. And that kind of makes up for it a little bit. So I would say it is competently tuned, but it is a little bit, again, that sort of Harman-esque V-shaped thing, right? V for Volare. Exactly. Um, you know, when I listen to this subjectively, um, I'm not going to say it's my preference, but I think for the Harman gang, this is one to consider highly. I would rate it, if you're used to like the variations, for example, this one might be in line with that one. I actually think that personally I would choose this over the variations, just because for me this one is less about, like, it's not as shouty because of the balance between upper mids and treble. It's more about the shrillness up here that gets to me, because again, for me in my pinna effects, it's considerably less than this. It's much closer to JM1. And this is basically how I hear it. I hear it as having a dip here. I hear it as being a bit forward in the upper mids, imparting a considerable amount of clarity, and then a bit of shrillness. The rest of the treble balance here serves to balance out some of what would otherwise be as perceived as shout. And for that reason, I say I actually prefer this over the variations, because for the variations, it's more about the shout and the glare, at least in my ear. Whereas this one, again, that shout and glare that would otherwise be there gets masked by the rest of the treble. It's just that overall treble level is too much for my taste. I think what I would do, I think there's a couple of things that you could do here to adjust this with EQ. I think the biggest one would probably be to fill in this region, because once you do that, this, like the leanness of the mids, it doesn't come across as lean, and it's much easier to do. If you did want to be more specific about it, I would drop the like you could again, you could downshift the whole thing if you wanted to, but also some fairly easy wide Q filters would fix this, would solve this issue if you find it too glary. But again, I think for the Harman gang, this is not at all one that needs EQ. If you're the kind of person who really likes the Harman tuning, like Harman IE or even Harman over ear, and you have pinna effects such that they are more similar to the 5 2/8, which would be on the brighter end of the spectrum. I don't know this for sure, but I would sort of expect that people with smaller ears, it might be the case that this would do well for you. I don't have enough data on that. That's just a total guess. But yeah, I think, if you have pinna effects that are like this head's ear, then this will sound pretty darn good to you, I think. And so I expect, like if we're thinking about Harman IE as being preferable to a particular group, if we think that's in part because of their head-related transfer function and pinna effects that their brain expects to hear, when they get this kind of response on something that is, not exactly Harman, it's still going to be preferable. But that's basically the tuning. So let me just first let me show you guys the tip differences. And I found, so there are a whole bunch of different tips, and I have them kind of labeled here. I found these ones to be the best. These are the TT55 tips, but then I also tried them with a whole bunch of other ones. So the ones that come in the box, you get TW43, TW45, TS or ST50, and then TT55, and then a bunch of foams. But then I also tried them with the coffee tips, and then the flange tips, which I just have lying around. Those don't come with it, but I'll just show you guys here. The response is very similar for most of it, just that the differences kind of show up here in the treble. So if you are sensitive to the mid treble, it would be worth trying some of these other tips, and they do kind of taper it down a bit. The flange tips ended up going really weird, so they didn't quite fit ideally in the canal. Coffee tips I did not like, but they significantly killed the mid treble and kind of made the upper treble a bit weird. I did not like them with this one. It did also kill some of the lower treble though. So, overall I'm finding I'm not really a huge fan of the coffee tips. And then I also tried them with some generic tips here. And these did something weird. Like these are just some generic white little tips that I have. I can't remember what IEM they came with. But they created this weird feature here at around like 6.3K and then they considerably dipped the mid treble. So again, my preference for tips would be, the TT55s. Because they're a little bit more even here. I find that typically, the response, if you have something that, even though overall the balance might be more to your preference, if it creates a more noticeable distinction between certain regions of the frequency response, it's just as likely to sound unnatural rather than the whole thing being too dark or too bright, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of why I prefer it like this, where it's a little bit more of a natural timbre, and then I would just downshelf the treble, something like that. The other thing that I want to note here with the 5 and 2/8 that I'm finding, and I don't know if anybody else finds it like this, is that oftentimes when I measure something and then I do a manual sweep, like a tone generated sweep, I find that the features, even if they don't show up in the same spot for me as what I see on the graph, the features themselves are similar. And so sometimes, and this is actually a case for showing raw measurements, and I think that this is something that we overlooked in our video when we were talking about, compensated or calibrated is better. It is better for readability because you avoid the visual illusions. But one of the things that you don't get that, compensated or calibrated measurements actually make worse is that you don't get a sense of what the various features might be as they, if they are shifted, for example. So in this case, I'm looking specifically at, this kind of bump here. It doesn't perfectly line up with this feature at around, of the DFH-RTF at around 8K, but that doesn't mean that it isn't going to be there, right? It just means that in this condition, it's slightly shifted. And I think that that's when you start doing manual, tone gen based sweeps, you can kind of start to correlate those, even though they don't line up perfectly with where those features are on the graph. And the same is true for measurements on other rigs. I'm just sort of finding this to be the case. Okay, I'm going to move back to the camera now. I've returned. So subjectively, how do I feel about this? Things that it does incredibly well is the sense of physicality and impact. The bass is just it's just tactile and really solid bass. I like the bass. Just put it that way. The spaciousness is there with this one. For as much as IEMs have spaciousness, this has that. I won't say it is I've been listening to the Subtonic Storm lately. It does not have that effect at all. But this is not. I don't find this to be horribly claustrophobic or anything like that. The timbre to me does suffer again because it has that sort of shrillness that of the Harman shrillness, I guess I would call it, that makes it sound maybe not quite as smooth to my ear. But again, for the people in the Harman segment, I think that this won't be a problem for you at all. And for the treble, it's confusing to say, but I do find this to be detailed. I find it to be good for the trailing ends of tones, the resolution and all that stuff. I also, again, when I'm doing these sort of manual sweeps, I'm finding there are to be some colorations for my ear. So I would put this, again, up there for some of these subjective qualities with IEMs like the variations, which, again, for a lot of those qualities is very good, I find. And the key thing here, I would say, is clarity. This is much more about clarity at the cost of naturalness and at the cost of, that sort of euphonic character that I think, imparting a bit of, it's a bit lean there in the mids, and that's why I find it to be a bit more about that sort of kind of upper mid-rangey clarity focus kind of thing. And you just need to decide if that's the kind of sound signature that you like. I mean, I personally, this is not my kind of sound signature, but I like this better than many other IEMs that go for similar sound signatures and just sort of whiff it, in my opinion, right? So if you are considering these types of tunings, and again, there are people who like that, this would be high on that list, in my estimation. So that is the Volare, and I will now take some questions. If you guys have any questions about the Volare, by all means, drop them in the comments. Can we get a quick smile? No. There. Vortex reviews. When Volare is a nice sounding set. I've been using them since yesterday. By the way, am I clipping? I hope I'm not clipping. You guys let me know if I'm clipping. I don't think I am. I think I'm deliberately quiet. Let's move this up a little bit. There we go. That's a little louder. Resolve only smiles when you're looking at a pair of HE6s. HE6s with Sandara pads and with EQ. Because I got to kill that 9K peak. Or it's like 9 point something. I know what you mean by Harman-ish. Yeah, like, that's the thing, right? Like, Harman really doesn't work for me at all. Like, Harman IE. Harman over-ear, I love. I think is fantastic. But for me, given my pinna effects, it's not a suitable tuning. And I think it's sort of an open question, you know, how HRTF I should say expected HRT expected response impacts preference, you know, and the relationship there. I'm not going to say, for example, that, you know, 100% HRTF matching is necessarily going to be preferred by everybody. In fact, I know it's not. We need some sort of tilt. So people at some level prefer more bass and less treble. But who is to say that, you know, people wouldn't just prefer a treble shelf in a particular spot if given the option, or a bass shelf or something like that, right? So that's kind of why I don't want to be saying, well, you know, this 100% HRTF expectation matching thing. But certainly it is a factor, and I think for me, you know, that's in the areas where I know my pinna effects to be much closer to population average. Those are the areas that are, you know, perceptually problematic. So people don't conflate Harman IE. Oh yeah, don't conflate with Harman IE with OE. That's true, but let me just actually pop back over to the graph here. So what I'm showing you guys again, just for anybody who showed up late, this is my internal target for an estimation for Harman OE, not IE, because with the 5128's more accurate acoustic impedance, there's a chance that we don't need two different targets on this system. We would for the Gross systems, but on this system, we wouldn't necessarily. And ultimately, there's no reason why we should assume that people have different preferences for in-ear headphones compared to over-ear headphones. Like the use condition, like it's sound at the eardrum, and the use condition is adjacent enough, like on ear or like over your ear or in your ear. The only difference is that the pinna effects are being bypassed. So for what people's actual preferences are, there's no, like, if you imagine that this was all just like a flat line across. Just get rid of the. Imagine you had just like a perfectly flat line. You said, okay, what are people's preferences here? You know, well, presumably they would want some sort of bass shelf, and what they would want for the treble, you know, depending on the segment, might be different as well, or the bass to treble delta might be different depending on the segment. But the idea that whatever the response, you know, from a flat line would be that people prefer, the idea that those would be different for IEMs or headphones, I'm not so sure there's anything that really suggests that needs to be the case. If there is, I have not read that. But what does probably need to be the case is a consideration for the fact that the IEM is bypassing the pinna, and therefore, you know, the pinna effects are needing to be assumed. And so that kind of messes things up. And it might mean that if there are certain trends for, you know, pinna effects, for example, we get preference clusters around that. That would be sort of my expectation. I don't know if that's true, but if I were a betting man, I think that would be something that shakes out of in-ear research. Sadly, I broke my Truth Ear Hola, and now I can't find them anywhere. Will they become available again? Would you know? I have not reviewed the Hola. I know nothing about the Hola, but Jamie says it was discontinued, so there you go. Do you like the Storm? It's in. I just put it away in here because I'm very careful. It's not mine. It's a kind community member lent it to me for review, so I'll be doing a review of it. Do I like it? I can, people say it's like the most detailed IEM out there. I can see why people say that, but to me, it also like strongly reinforces the notion that Precog Vision's recent video was talking about, which is that the concept of detail is tasteful coloration. And I would say it actually, for most of its response, it's very close to JM1 with 2018 filters. So it's it's yet another thing. It's like Dusk plus plus, Dusk default DSP plus plus. However, there is a feature there that I'm not too keen on. But they do something kind of interesting with that one there, where there's like a strong dip at around 8 kilohertz, where I think most people's length mode resonances might be. I don't know for sure, right? Like I know that's just where people align measurements for IEMs, right? But the reality is that that feature shifts depending on the person quite a bit. So for me, it's usually around 6.1 kilohertz, but depending on the IEM, it can go all up as far as 8 kilohertz, right? So, and depending on like how the IEM sits in my ear, if it's further in, then that can go up to 8 kilohertz. If it's further out, it goes lower down to like 5.5, 5.7 kilohertz. That's the main one, right? There's obviously other ones above that as well. So it's an interesting IEM where they basically cut that region where the length mode resonance could be for people. It's not where it is for me, but I think that's kind of a unique way of doing it. And I imagine for a lot of people, it's going to sound very, very natural and smooth in that region. Personally, I find it to be like a bit forward at around like 5.7K. Like there's a, I mean, you see it in the graph too. There's a sort of a feature there. And then it's definitely boosted in the upper treble. But what I like about the upper treble is on the Storm, pardon me, is it's boosted, yes, but it's not like a super fine-grained thing. It's like there's more of a it's more of like a wide Q elevation, if that makes sense. And it does impart there's a sense in which the details do pop more in the music. I don't know if I would say it sounds normal in the way that I want things to. It sounds exaggerated, but that's what I'm saying. Like I get why people like it. Do you think the reason for people prefer bass more than treble mainly because when they can afford to buy high-end audio equipment, their age effects already kick in hard to hear higher frequency? Let me just think if I can understand your question here correctly. Do you think the reason people prefer bass more than treble? Do they? Like, you mean overall, right? Like a bass to treble delta of a downward tilt of some kind, like 7 to 12 dB out of I don't remember exactly what the median is there, but people do prefer a downward tilt. I don't know. I actually think the main reason for that is because we exist typically in rooms and that sounds more normal to us. I mean, I don't know the exact reason why. It just happens to be that people prefer that. But yeah, I remember reading something about how we're normally in environments where you would end up with a more let's say less ideal spaces for that. But then whether that ends up being closer to Harman in-room, or with the tilt, I don't know. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I don't know why people have that preference specifically. Could be that there's something to do with when the ways in which we typically hear music, the ways in which we typically hear stuff. Like if you listen to, if you go to, I'm trying to think of, there are situations where you would hear diffuse field sounding headphone as normal, but I don't. There are again very few people who prefer that, so I don't want to make it seem like if you were at the Harman in room, like listening area where they did the research, if you listen to Harman in room before the filter adjustments, I don't know what that actually would sound like. I mean, it would probably sound pretty similar to just flat DF, right? And I bet that people wouldn't prefer it, but would it sound unnatural? I don't think so. So that's kind of why, to me, it's an open question. I don't know the answer. The room over the speakers or over headphone? In the room over what? No, in the room with speakers. Sorry, I phrased that weirdly, Joel. Like I'm saying, if you're in the Harman room before the filter adjustments, and you're getting the Harman in-room response at your eardrum, say, it wouldn't be preferred, obviously, but what I'm not sure about is if it would sound unnatural. See, here's my theory on all of this. At least one of the reasons I think why people prefer more bass and less treble is because as you turn the volume up, if you listen to any flat response, you're going to be quite limited with how loud that can go before it starts to be painful, I think. And I think if you tilt it, the volume can be increased. I think our sensitivity to the lower frequencies isn't going to be as much of an issue. But again, that's just my theory. I don't know if that's fact. It would sound like a room EQ'd to flat, which is bright, but not weird in terms of timbre. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. So not weird. It won't sound unnatural. It just will sound bright. And that's why people don't prefer it. They don't prefer it because it sounds, they don't prefer it for any reason of it sounding unnatural. It's because it's too bright. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, that's a better way of putting it, Joel. Oh yeah, Stephen McTally, how loud you listen. Yeah, I think that's probably part of it. The question about the Volare, is there a cartoon child on the box? No. So, does it get more marks or less marks as a result of that? Are you able to compare with the MegaFest? When's that review coming? That review is coming out, I think, next week. It's not me doing the review. So, no, I'm not comparing with MegaFest. But I would expect the MegaFest to sound more natural than the Volare for me. Again, given my pin effects. So, like, just to be clear, I recommend the Volare to people who are the Harman people, for sure. And I recommend it even to people who aren't. If you don't know, for example, I think it's worth checking out. It is, I put it, say, variations adjacent. I wouldn't necessarily say better than the variations. I wouldn't necessarily say worse. It is, to me, better, but for the Harman people, again, I don't know if that's the case. I just really don't like it when things sound shouty. Yeah, plus you get +5 detail with no cartoon child. Okay. Do you review Noble Audio IEMs? Wondering if you do and if you've ever listened to Noble Ronin. No, I don't review Noble Audio. Well, not that I have anything against Noble Audio IEMs. I just have not had any in to review. And also, I have not found a single Noble IEM that I've liked. So that's something. People usually prefer bass and treble because bass is where the fun part of the music is. You don't usually find someone going, yeah, cymbals. I don't know. I get pretty excited about cymbals. I get excited about cymbals and snare drums and hi-hats. I'm a drummer, so like for me, or was a drummer, formerly. And to me, it's like if that stuff sounds slightly off, I can't handle it. The Harmon people. Yeah, no, like it's there. As we saw from the research, there is clearly a segment that prefers that kind of sound, right? Or at the very least enjoys it. I mean, I know for some of the other ones, they were not as evenly spread for trained and untrained, but that's also just very preliminary. I have a 64 audio U4S. I want an IM with a different flavor / side grades. Would the Volare be good for that? Yeah, it's different. That's quite different from the U4S in a number of ways. Like the U4S is kind of like has that more U-shaped 64 audio kind of sound signature, whereas the Volare is definitely more Harman. I mean, like if you're considering that and you're wondering like what is this Harman stuff all about, if you haven't heard a Harman-ish IEM, I think this is a good indication of some of those things, right, that are potentially make or break for people. Like there are people who love that sort of shifted kind of more ear gain focused presentation with that lower mid-range cut. But then there's also people like me who much prefer JM1 style tunings, population average style tunings. So that's why for me it's like the Dusk with default DSP preset is one of the best sound signatures in any IEM that's on the market. The other one that's close to that is, well, there's two others that are close to that: the High Senior Megafest and the Subtonic Storm. So I'm not saying the Storm is exactly that. The Storm has a couple of other features as well, but for the mids and for the bass and much of the like the ear gain, it's very similar to JM1 with 2018 filters and the 3 kilohertz adjustment. So I would say, if you like, given that you already have an IEM that is more on the U-shaped side and less about the ear gain than the U4S, I do think the Volare would be a good alternative because it's a very different kind of sound signature. Dusk with DSP is real good. It is, but I also agree with Mr. Super that the DSP cable is rough. It's not like the digital artifacting thing, or whatever we want to call that, like digital noise thing. I've talked to people about this who have the Dusk in for review, and some of the people are like, yeah, I don't hear this thing you're talking about at all. But then there's other people who, like Listener, who his seems to be doing it a lot, like very audibly. And so I was talking to, well, he actually recorded it, his, and it's, at least in the recording, it's stronger on his unit than it is on mine. And mine does have that effect, but it's not so bad that it's like distracting from the music, if that makes sense. But yeah, I would say it's an issue, and Chronicle really needs to, well, it's not Chronicle's fault, right? It's Moondrop's fault. But I think that Moondrop needs to fix that. Like, I would say if it's an issue with the hardware, fix the hardware, replace the hardware. If it's an issue with, anything to do with software, which I don't know how it would be, but maybe, then they got to fix that. Like, they really need to overhaul that whole cable concept, because it's a great concept. It's just that the execution is just so poor that it needs to be better, in my opinion. Dusk DSP or High Senior Megafest. Yeah, those two are really the ones for sound signature that I think are in contention for like the best kind of sound signature to go for, in my opinion, right? But again, probably depends on the group that you fall into. Joel says the thing I find amusing about the Dusk DSP cable is that it only helps if you have an Android device. The Android devices can use wavelet, which works great. That's not technically true. So the Dusk DSP cable does work with any USB-C like audio capable device. So you don't need an Android device to use the Dusk DSP. You can plug it into a laptop and you get the Dusk default DSP. The only thing you don't get is the app. And the app is what allows you to customize your own values, right? So if you if you want to switch to the Harman preset or something else, that's where you need an Android device. But yeah, you can run it with an iPhone. You can run it with provided it's the USB-C one. You can run it with a computer, whatever. And it does retain, like, it retains the profiles, but also it retains the default Dusk DSP preset is the one that is baked in. If you just plug in the Dusk cable into something without having done anything with the app, that's what you get. And that's good. That's why it's like you literally just swap to the other cable and then that's the sound that you get. Yeah, and so and they do have the Link 1.0 app, I believe, for iOS, I believe. But I didn't try that. I don't have an iOS device. But either way, it's like the app is terrible, right? So they just need to put some money into fix. If they want DSP to be like their thing, they have to put money into it. Like they have to develop it properly. You find it too distracting for lots of content, but for music, it's not as noticeable. Yes, I would agree with that for the noise issues with the cable. Like if you are listening to spoken word, that could be an issue. With music, though, it's like it's pretty faint. It reminds me of like if you have those like the older noise canceling headphones, where they would sometimes have the spurious noise a little bit in there. But then when you're listening to music, you don't really notice it. To me, it's less about like it being perceptually all that bothersome compared to the fact that we should expect better. Like in 2024, things shouldn't have these problems. You know what I mean? So that's kind of why I think it's like, yeah, Moondrop needs to do better at that. Yes, but spoken word sounds good. Sounds good on most IEMs. Not on the Empire Ears ones. A pretty strong resonance there in the mids for some reason. At least for me. What's JM1? JM1 is the approximation of population average pinna effects with the canal transfer function. Well, it's an estimation, right? It's not the actual transmission function of the 5 and 2/8, but it's meant to be, an approximation of population average. Hobby Talk, you would like population average. You would definitely like population average. Or JM1 with 2018 filters and 3 kHz adjustment. Okay. Gatorade break. Yeah. This is Gatorade Zero, which is amazing. Pinna Effect is the hot new single from the Harman People's debut album Moondrop. Yes, exactly. All right. Yeah, I really do I want to get a High Senior Mega Fest in. I'm also very interested in some of the collabs from Giz Audio. I think he's got one in the works. That's interesting. I'm not sure what the status of that one is, so I'm not, or if he sent it out to other people yet. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's. I'm very excited to try some of his stuff. Like I haven't tried the Chopin either, or Chopin. How are the technicalities in the Dusk at the 360 price point compared to the B2 Dusk? I mean, it depends on what you mean by technicalities. If you mean like upper treble, it has more. It's just more details. um, yeah, the the technicalities slider was cranked to the max on the Dusk. um, this is one thing. Like, I suppose my biggest issue with it is calling it technicalities. Yeah, I think if we refer to it as like subjective descriptions of the experience, I don't have an issue with it. But to call it technicalities is like it encroaches on like let's talk about the distortion performance or something else, right? Like or frequency response. Like it's a semantic issue that I have with it. But yeah. Yeah, and to speak more about that, like detail is either tasteful coloration, as Precog says, or it's likely to do with certain features in the treble, and depending on who you are and what you're identifying, right, these are things that can also be measured. It's timbre is also definitely frequency response related. I mean, it's it goes without saying. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But like, I have no issues talking about that stuff. I have no issues describing an IEM as being more natural sounding or more slammy or more detailed sounding. I'm not saying that in reference to any magical properties of drivers and transducers. I'm saying that as it relates to my experience conferred by the acoustic performance of the IEMs, which are measurable. So, yeah. So how is it good? Yeah, I think it's like with the analog mode. I think it's good. I think it's better with the Dusk DSP. I really like the bass on it. I agree with Mr. Super on that as well. I really like the bass. I think, he noted the soundstage difference. I'm not sure if it was him who noted this, or maybe it was a listener. I can't remember, but yeah, there's like you can tell if you switch from the Dusk 3.5 like analog mode to the DSP default. It sounds more like spacious with the DSP default. And surprise, surprise, it's because there's a major reduction in that forward character to the mid-range frequencies, like the mid and upper mid-range frequencies. Which, if you compare this on other IEMs, like I'm talking like 1 to 2K roughly. And if you look at that region on other IEM or headphones or IEMs where that is forward, they're often more claustrophobic sounding. I'm thinking of the HD 650s. I'm thinking of the Focals. Compare that with something that has a dip there, like the HD 800S or the Hi-Fi Man headphones. They sound more spacious there. So this seems to be an area that has an effect on the perception of spaciousness. And the Dusk, when you go from the analog mode to the DSP mode, you get that change as well. So thumbs up for me. And to me, it's like when you go from the Dusk analog mode to the Dusk default DSP, it's so much more technical, if we're going to use that term, or like subjectively good, right? Because like it's like all the imaging gets better, everything gets more focused sounding because there are fewer of those resonances and deviations that my brain is trying to compensate for or trying to make sense of. It brings things in focus. It makes things sound more cohesive. These are just words, but also more natural, right? That's another word. You get my meaning. You couldn't tell the difference between the BA tweeters and the planars in the Dusk. Yes, I could. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's just more energy, I think, on the Dusk. I believe, like it's upper treble, like it's very clearly planar sounding to me. But You confuse listener with Mr. Super? Oh, I see what you're saying. No, yeah. No, it's just because I was recently watching Mr. Super's review of The Dusk. But it might have been listener's review, which is considerably more critical. But he hates any and all treble and likes 24 dB tilt, unironically. You can tell if I said that. No, I'm joking. Joel says, I think detail is related to how smooth the treble is and how well it matches your HRTF in your own ear canal. Yeah, I would agree. Well, okay. So that's how I think of subjective goodness. Again, like detail, like what this is a word that's going to be something different to everybody, but like I think of subjective goodness as that. But there are people like Precog's take on this is that if you have certain colorations that make certain regions of the music stand out more, that can come across as something being more detailed. And I'm inclined to agree. Like I've heard stuff that's like that, where it's like there's a consequence, there's a trade-off to timbre and to the naturalness, right? All that stuff. Often when you have some of these colorations, especially in the treble. But yeah, I tend to think that subjective goodness, like for me, what I look for in subjective goodness is exactly what you wrote there. I don't know that I would call it detail in the traditional sense of, it's enhancing things, like cranking up the detail slider or the clarity slider in Lightroom. I would say that is not natural, but it might make some of the details pop more, if that makes sense. All right, let's keep going. Let's go for spicy hour now. I have about 1 hour left before I gotta run. So spicy hour. Bring your spicy takes. Yeah, I think coloration does count as detail, as essentially most IEMs are some variation of V shape. I listen to Fearless S8 or Z8S and my Diva, and they certainly emphasize different colorations. If it's detail coming at the expense of timbre, I wouldn't call it detail. I'd say that's just an esoteric tuning that falls under the umbrella of timbre. Yeah, Joel, clearly you and I look for the same things, but I think this comes down to like a semantic argument, right? Because what you're referring to as detail is subjective goodness in a way that other people who are referring to detail aren't necessarily thinking of it as, right? Like, again, I use the Lightroom photography analogy, and you and I might be looking for a natural representation of color, and somebody else might be like, well, I want the clarity slider to be cranked to the max, or the sharpness slider to be cranked to the max, and that might be detail to them. Let's enhance the micro contrast or whatever we want to call that. Yeah. And so depending on how somebody is thinking of this and where their attention is going, what's grabbing their attention for subjective goodness and badness, I think we can have come out with two very different descriptions, right? So that's why even a term as simple as detail, it's like that seems to be a very obvious thing. I'd lean more towards Precog's take being a more faithful interpretation of the word detail, where it's like you are forced to notice certain things in the music more as a result of these colorations, but it doesn't mean that it is more subjectively gooder for people who have, let's say, listened to a lot of stuff. When do we see a Resolve collab, and with who? It's a good question. I'm not opposed to doing one. I would like to do one at some point. I have worked on ones in the past, but the problem is that nobody can hit what I want. So I don't want to put something out there that I wouldn't, be like, this is stamp, of excellence. And the other thing is, like, if I were to ever do a collab, I would not take any royalties or compensation for it. So, because as soon as you do that, it's like, then you're part of that collab fatigue crowd. I don't have the same bones that other people pick, when it comes to that stuff. I have no issues with that. But maybe in the future there will be one. Resolve launches an IEM collab. It's JM1 with 2018 filters and a 3K adjustment. Yes, but it would be slightly different in the treble. I would add just a little bit more air up there. Not to the degree of dusk, but a little bit more. And I could see a slight difference in bass as well, depending on that treble level. Actually, if you haven't had a chance, I would recommend try EQing something the sound guys target. It's pretty good. Yeah. Okay, but certain IMs can sound detail without elevated treble, though. Precog's example of VE8 does sound like it has good mid-range detail, despite quite rolled in the upper treble. But is it actually rolled? It says, Joel says 711 couplers aren't very useful above 8 to 10K. Yeah. So, like, you would need to measure it on something other than a 711, I think. And also, like, how do we know that that's how it is at the eardrums of individual people who are reporting that? Or, as Precog says in his video, where their hearing rolls off. But also, like, I wouldn't say that in all cases, detail refers to extended or boosted or exaggerated upper treble. I think it's just one of the things that people gravitate to, in terms of where their attention goes. The other aspect in that video that he talked about is how detail could be coloration, which doesn't necessarily require massive upper treble, right, or extended upper treble. It could be rolled off and still have certain, tasteful colorations in certain regions of the frequency response that are, enhancing or making certain things pop, increasing the contrast for certain parts of the music. Detail in IM seems to always measure with a peak around 10 to 11K on 711. Yeah, again, we need to stop really, like 711 is like 200 to 8-ish 10K, like 200 to 10K. That's 711. If you want more than that, if you want to like get an accurate read of more than that, you would need the 5 and Twitter 4620. But even then, you would need, like, that's not a guarantee of how it's going to be at your eardrum. So Sound Guy's target is very good. Yeah, I like it. And it's very close to JM1 with 2018 filters and 3K adjustment. Surprise, surprise. Like, it's almost identical. So it's just that they have a little bit more treble. You can't call yourself a reviewer if you do collaborations. I think you can. I think all that, people piss and moan about, like, you can't trust what they have to say about whatever. Well, could you trust them before? I feel like if you couldn't trust them after they do a collab, you probably couldn't trust them before. Like, it's kind of like what Listener was saying about how, because of the type of person that Critical is, his trust in him does not hinge on whether or not he has a product in the market. So I think it really depends on the person. And I would say the same for other people who are doing collabs. Like, there are people who I don't trust, regardless of whether or not they have a collab in the market. And there are people who I do trust who do have collabs in the market, right? Like Critical, for example. So I think it depends much more on that. There was another. Dusk 2 be significantly less competitive if it shipped with a higher quality and more expensive DAC cable. It's an unfortunate but essential flaw. No, I don't know that I agree. Um, I think he should have done it. I think he should have released it at $500, and I think it should have been a actually much better Dusk. Like the default DSP is in there, but like a much better digital cable, like USB-C cable, like that doesn't have the noise issues or the app issues or whatever, right? Like it should be at $500 with that being significantly better. So, or maybe that's what you're saying here. Like, I think it would be more competitive, not less competitive, if it was, because it's like the default Dusk DSP is competing with IEMs that cost like $500-$600. So, reviewers that collab or make their own product, how can you ensure they remain impartial on other brands and products? Well, yeah, this goes back to what I was saying before. If you don't, if something changes about what they're doing, then yeah, you can't. But like, if they're the kind of person who isn't going to change who they are, then I think it's probably fine. But the answer is you can't, right? Like everybody has biases, and the community and other factors that are going to creep into their evaluations, and you just need to decide which ones you care about. And like some people earn money through affiliate links, some people earn money through royalties from collabs, some people literally just only say good things about stuff and just chill stuff. Some people, yeah, I'm trying to think of other examples. Well, but the obvious one would be like, we're funded by a store, like you have to decide which ones really matter to you, and sometimes they matter, sometimes they don't. But I think what matters so much more is the people, right? Like if you feel, and the track record, if you feel somebody is going to say it like it is, then it shouldn't matter if they have a product in the market. Like it's the same thing with the DMS Omega thing, right? He's, I think, rightly worried about, people kind of targeting him for, not being able to be an unbiased reviewer at this point. But the way I see it is like, I kind of think like if you don't change anything about your content, then who cares if that's the sentiment that people have. The other side I was going to say is that like this is kind of one of the reasons why relying on data is so important, or focusing on data is so important, because there are all kinds of different biases. Somebody said this a while ago. If they were saying something along the lines of like, they were being critical of reviewers not having to buy the product. They're saying, I buy all these things, therefore my take is like the best take and the most, like judge or bias free take, because I buy the product. They're not, given to me or sent to me or whatever. It's like, but that biases you. That influences what you're going to say because you put your money down for it. So I think a lot of it is like people don't even realize, what those biases are. No IEM can be competitive at $500, $600. You say that, but no IEM exists under that. No analog IEM exists under that has the right tuning. So as soon as, like, if there's one that does it right, then, they can price it at whatever they think. Are you allowed to review the Omega? I have it behind me. I don't think it's the official tuning though. So, no, I'm not going to be reviewing the Omega. It's like, for me, it's like, it's not about the fact that it has nothing to do with like monetary relationship or anything like that. It's the fact that DMS is like a colleague. Like he's a friend and someone who I work with. So it's like, that would be a really weird thing to do. And same thing with Precog's IEM. I wasn't I'm not gonna review that. Like, I have thoughts on it, but I'm not gonna be, giving a review. And that's not to say that I couldn't review it. Like, I would totally be able to. But if I care at all about sort of the positioning of a video, it's a pretty weird looking one. I don't know. Which is why no IEM could be worth 500. Okay, so here's my like related spicy take. I don't think that there's any IEM that's competitive without EQ. Period. End of story. Let's go more peppers. Sennheiser Momentum plus Qdelix is all you need, and it's Sean approved. It's related. What is your opinion on companies, specifically the Singaporean IEM boutique shops, charging 3 to 4K for tuning in IEMs with 500 euro components in them? I don't have any issues with prices being, higher than their component cost, if that makes sense, right? Like, I would actually argue that they probably have less than 500 euro worth of components in them. To me, the price of something is never proportional to its material cost, because, well, I mean, it's basically, I've said this before, but it's basically ability and willingness to pay, right? And so that has nothing to do with the material cost. It's what people are willing to spend on it. What the manufacturer thinks people are willing to spend on it. Whether or not they actually will is a different question. But at the same time, I also think that it's getting ridiculous. Things are getting priced like to the absurd levels, and it's like stuff. There was an IEM that's like $10,000 or something like that, right? And to me, you know what that feels like? That feels like the equivalent of like. Have you heard of the term whaling? It feels like that, like where they're trying to basically, it's bait for people with more money than sense, and they don't need it to be a good product. Even they just need it to cost $10,000. So to me, it feels just exorbitant and unnecessary, and I don't think IEMs should cost more than like $1,000. Period. I don't think headphones should cost more than $1,000. Period. They do, and I think that's not really necessary. But again, price has nothing to do with ability or nothing to do with material cost. It has everything to do with ability and willingness to pay. So that's sort of my take on that stuff. And just to kind of like mention something else, my suggestion for anybody who is sort of upset at the idea that that something is exponentially more than its material cost, make it. But if you think you know what the material cost is for something, or the production cost, because that's another factor, make it yourself. Sell it for a little bit less. Undercut them. Profit. That would be my recommendation. But really, like, I mean, what is missed in that the argument that people have there about like, oh, it's not, it's cheap components and a expensive price tag. Even if it is the case, right? You don't know what the actual production cost is. You don't know what the tooling cost is. You don't know what the actual margins are that they're getting on that stuff. And for IEMs, it's typically more than like the margins are typically more than over-ear headphones. But at the same time, it's not really a fair argument to make. You can't really make the argument that like, the material cost is X and the sale price is significantly more than that, and therefore you're getting ripped off. You might be getting ripped off, but you can only really make that argument if you also know the production cost and what the actual revenue is from that product. Okay, let's keep going here. There is an effect about that. People buy product with real money will often say good things more. Real research from free game vs boxed game. What? Higher. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, if you buy something, you are more likely to say good things about it because you are convincing yourself that it is good because it's your own money that went into it. Absolutely. Like I know people who there are people out there who just like buy everything and then they review it all. And then they just say everything is good. And then you're left like, well, this is a useless endeavor. This is not, there's nothing journalistic about this at all. And I'm not saying like we're journalists or anything like that. I'm saying like there's nothing journalistic in the sense of like judgment about a thing being good or bad. That's just not part of that conversation. If the Dan Clark audio headphone lineup needs more bass, it's so much lacking it cannot be seriously $5,000. What? Well, the lineup isn't $5,000. I don't think they have any headphones that are 5,000. Do they? They're lacking in bass. I don't know that they are. I think they're lacking in whatever people talk about when it comes to that sort of sense of contrast. Use a better term here, sure, but I don't think they're lacking in bass. One thing I noticed. Okay, so I actually have the E3 here with me, and someone asking like, "What's my favorite closeback?" That's pretty high on that list. I'd say E3. I'd take the E3 over the high end ones, right? Like the Stealth and the Expanse, yeah, definitely. Yeah, one thing I notice with certain planars, and the DCA ones typically are that you can turn the volume up and it never feels loud, if that makes sense. Like it always sometimes somehow feels soft. Not loud in like the volume SPL sense, but it never feels like lively. It feels like it has a softer kind of like muted presentation somehow. And that could be frequency response too. I'm not saying it's not. If you're committed to getting the best sound quality you can, all audio products need EQ in some way. Yes, 100%. What reviewers would you trust to review something you could not review due to conflict of interest? In terms of headphones, or just not in this space? So like I trust when Critical reviews something, I trust his reviews, right? Another example is so affiliate links are a thing that is not great in practice regularly. Let's just say people will often capitulate to the incentive structure that gets created as a result of affiliate links. But if you watch the reviews from Aaron at Arian's Audio Corner, I trust his judgments about speakers despite the fact that he uses affiliate links. So that's another example. I can't review that stuff because I don't have a Clipple system and I don't have access to the speakers that he does. But like, he's doing it right. Like if you are at all interested in speakers, his is the only channel that I actually trust on that stuff. Like I won't really bother with anybody else. What else? What other? Who else would I trust? Again, to me, it doesn't come down to the fact that they have conflicts of interest, because everybody has a certain bias of some kind, and you have to do your best to hedge against that. You have to just be yourself and say it like it is, despite that fact. I mean, like, I'm thinking about it. If there's something in like other areas, the guy from Camera Conspiracies, he's using affiliate links for like everything, but he just gives his honest take about stuff, and you can tell like it's not. He regularly says the stuff that he has affiliate links for is crap. So people are willing to do that. I don't really. I'm not worried about the fact that he uses affiliate links, right? So. Some examples, at least. Front dampening kills subjective goodness and technicality. I don't know that it does. It might. Well, if we're referring to this as treble in some way, it could. Like you could, kill some of the, some of the frequency, some of the energy there. Yeah, and then sure, yeah. But I mean, like as a separate metric is the thing that I think is maybe a bit dubious. I don't know. I'm not saying definitively I know this to be the case, but I'm skeptical. What is your favorite closeback headphone and why? I'd say probably the DCA E3. I just find that its total balance is like one of the better ones, if not one of the best ones for a closeback. It's not without its issues. Like I actually I find there's a peak for me at 7 kilohertz, and then on the unit that I evaluated, it actually has a little too much ear gain, but on other units probably not. So I would say the DCA E3. IEMs and headphones are inherently flawed, not different systems, and the end goal is for proper spatial audio reproduction. I don't even believe this. We just need more spice. Not different systems. I don't know what you mean by that. Do you mean the headphones and IEMs are not different systems, or different? You mean like source gear? I'm not sure what you mean by that. But the end goal of proper spatial audio reproduction. Yeah, I actually think that's the frontier that every major company is trying to solve, and I think that is the next step. Whoever can figure that out the best is going to lead the way when it comes to, audio. Because with stereo, with headphones and IEMs and stereo recordings, any real sense of spaciousness or soundstage or anything like that, that's really just an illusion. It's an illusion that's the result of the use condition. And that's very different from actual immersive audio. And if you listen to binaural recordings, it's a different story. But it's a categorically different experience. And anything that is, we talk about like, oh yeah, like I can hear like the ride cymbals like way over here, and like the whatever's way over here, and you can hear this, like you listen to Yoshi Horikawa's bubbles and like the image placement, all that stuff. Those are all things that are part of the mix, right? And how it's been mixed basically. And so you're getting ideally, if you're having like some sort of ideal reproduction headphone or IEM for you, let's say, you're going to get whatever the representation of that mix is. And that could be affected in some way as a result of skewing frequency response, but the idea that there's some actual locatedness that's somehow separate from what's contained in the mix, I don't know about that. Okay, let's see. DMS should have a mirrored ASR review as headphone. I don't think that I don't know. It's up to him if he wants to, but that guy just straight up lies about stuff. So I don't know why anybody would send anything to him. Or they buy one product and they compare everything against that one thing they love. Yeah, there's the people who have like just like they're the single product evangelists. Yeah, and everything is trash compared to that single product that they're just like all about. Yeah, that's a thing. Can EQ make 1K or $500 IEM sound like 10K IEM? Sure. That doesn't mean it's going to make it sound better. I don't have the Synco Trace. I have the Nuo. Yeah, Nuo. I don't have the Synco Trace. I'd like to. My unofficial impressions of on the Omega. I mean, then I'm giving impressions. The only thing I will say is this originated when DMS and I were we were each sort of making a headphone, and then his turned into like an actual headphone, right? And we were both we both independently came to this conclusion that like there is no excuse for bad tunings. Like, I mean, there was a little bit of like needing to. This is all trial and error, right? But there was a little bit of like needing to get the fundamentals right. But once we had the fundamentals right, like the frequency response is not. It's not hard to make it good. it's not. It's probably hard to make it good at scale, right? And because once you take things from like the single, unit to like mass production, where you're not in control of that, then that probably makes things more challenging. But making a single thing that performs well, once you have like the fundamentals in place, and doing like certain things like using oval designs rather than circular designs, that was like, as soon as, at least in my case, I switched to a oval design, I was like, wow, this is so much better, so much easier to work with. But yeah, like it's not, there's really no excuse for bad tunings. So yeah, that's what I'll say about it. What's the channel called for speakers? Aaron's Audio Corner. Aside from audio, what other interests and hobbies do you like? I really like philosophy. So in my spare time, I regularly find myself on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. I enjoy those articles quite a bit. I'm just full of fun times. So I lead an exciting life, let me tell you. But also, so that's one of my hobbies. I also I like photography a lot. I like photography more than I like headphones, actually. So I'm into like cameras and stuff. What else do I like? I like building computers. I'm sort of techie in that sense. I enjoy that. I just recently swapped over my system from an AMD 5950X based system to a 14 whatever the 14900K thing. It's like the i9, but it's like not really a generational leap. It's just marginally better. But what it is really good at, and the reason why I got it, is when I'm working with my video editing software, the footage that I use regularly is long op footage, and the 14900K is way better for that than the AMD systems, and that's why I went to it. Because it's not like the 5950X is slow. It's a fine CPU. Like if I were just playing games, that would be great. I wouldn't need to upgrade, right? But because I'm using long op for my footage, it made a massive difference for that. So I'm enjoying that lately. For video games, I wish that I could spend more time doing that stuff. I used to be very like a competitive StarCraft player. I still play it, casually, right? But I do miss being in the competitive scene for that. That was a lot of fun. I think, like, sometimes I think, like, man, if I'd tried a little bit harder, if I'd been a little bit more dedicated, maybe I would have gotten into some, gone on some runs in tournaments. But I miss. There's something fun about being at your own personal peak, if that makes sense. And like kind of like coming up against your own limitations. And I felt I got close to that with StarCraft. So certainly not now. I haven't taken it seriously in a very long time. If Resolve was spicy, it would be flour. Oh my god. Please tell the headphone com overlords to buy a Clipple. My god. No, I mean, we were looking into it and then we were like, 100K. I don't know about that. Wait, you have the Kef LSX too? Oh, interesting. Do you like it? Um, yeah. Do you have a speaker setup, and what is it currently? Uh, the Kef LS50 wireless twos, and it's exactly like what Chronicle said. But I mean, I got them a while ago, but like, it's exactly like what he said, right? Like, I wouldn't say that they're better acoustically than what you can get for cheaper. They're very good and very simple and easy. And what I like about it is I can just go into my living room and be anywhere in my living space. Like I could be in the kitchen doing dishes, and I get nearly the same response that I do if I'm sitting on the couch, and it's just easy. Um, I am currently looking for a subwoofer for it, and I'm considering that the Kef KC62. I live in a small apartment. Like I live in basically a hovel. It's honestly it's falling apart. It's a piece of shit. It's a dump. Um, but it's in a nice area. And so I'd like to at some point find a new space where I can have a bit more, like this. What you see here, this is like the entirety of the room. So I have very little space as my home studio space to actually work. I'd like to get a space where I can actually set up a proper workshop types or lab situation with like I want to buy a 3D printer and set something up like that. So, but it's like in Vancouver, it's so expensive. Like I was just recently looking at places, and for what I want, there's like nothing under like $3,000 a month. And like everything else would be, it might be an upgrade in certain respects, but it would not be more space. So it's pretty rough here. A listener hates philosophy. How do you find the Aeon closebacks compared to E3 post EQ? I have not done that comparison. I find the E3 nicer by default though, and easier to EQ. The only issue with those E3s that I think Dan needs to iron out is because the pads are so influential. There's a greater chance of unit variation. And potentially even channel balance issues, but they're usually tested, so they should be okay for that. But I'm just saying, like, you could have a pretty significant difference depending on the pads, even if the drivers are well matched. Reviewers often tell you the more expensive headphones don't necessarily mean better headphone. The exception where price bias I seem always kicks is in technicalities, especially detail. So Precog had a take on this. I'm not sure that it's actually guaranteed. In fact, I don't. So okay, I'll back up. So Precog's take on this was originally that he does think there's a decent correlation or a trend, not like a correlation for price and performance, but because obviously it's not a sufficient condition for goodness, right? But there might be a trend for higher priced IEMs being more well received for some of these subjective qualities, because the manufacturer can do more with it. They basically they have more freedom to add whatever driver configurations they want or do more with the shell. They can basically be more specific or more deliberate when they're tuning it, and this allows them to impart certain tasteful colorations, as he calls it, where you might not get that flexibility in the lower end because you are basically like, pinching everything to get this thing out, right? To get this thing at a certain price point. You're trying to reduce costs as much as you can. So that might be true, but here's my sort of counter argument to that. It's that, and why I'm not making that claim, it's that in theory, you can also still get those tasteful colorations without whatever those components are without the additional components. You could theoretically get them acoustically, just depending on the shell design. But also you could get them by accident. So I think, so even if there might be trends for this, I think there are bound to be counterexamples. And so I don't think you can say, like, again, that's why it's not a sufficient condition. I mean, it might be a necessary condition for certain types of designs, but it's not a sufficient condition for better subjective technicalities or whatever, right? Do you still use the QLux 5K? Yes. Any difference between 2.5 and 3.5? I haven't noticed it. Which IEM is the best EQ with the QLux 5K? Honestly, the Dusk. Because you could just put in Crin's filters. Done. Favorite philosopher? Favorite. I mean, as it relates to this kind of stuff, Wittgenstein. But I wouldn't say he's my favorite. Good question. I think. There's many to choose from. I think there's a distinction between who I enjoy reading the most and whose views I actually find align more closely with my intuitions. And those are not necessarily the same. Like, and there's some philosophers who are just like, I can't read this. Like, it's just annoying to read. Like, Timothy Williamson, for example, is brilliant. If you've ever had the occasion to read him, though, it's painful. It's not fun to read. As far as the kind of stuff that I focus on, which is sort of perceptual theory, I would say the work that's been done there is largely pioneered by a guy named Michael Tai, at least for the modern stuff. He's quite good. He's wrong about a couple of things, but I would certainly sing his praises. But this is also like contemporary philosophy, right? Like if you're talking about like historical figures, I mean, the work of Kant is incredible. J.S. Mill, not necessarily for his work on moral philosophy, but on his historiographical stuff. Like, so basically, if you look at like the reason why we study Hume today, it's actually because of J.S. Mill. And not because of anything to do with interaction between them, but because of the ideas that got so thoroughly debunked by Mill in subsequent, basically like the followers of the common sense philosophers who were sort of taking shots at Hume. And it was, I believe, William Hamilton, who I think it was, who got savagely dismantled by J.S. Mill. At least I think it was Mill. I could be wrong about exactly the details there, but basically it's like because of, those ideas getting debunked, we now go back to Hume and we read Hume today. So I like it when stuff like that happens. For other contemporary stuff, Jonathan Haidt is quite interesting. I like reading his stuff, but that's more like moral psychology stuff, which is also fun, but not really. It was never really my focus. But that is stuff that nobody gives a shit about. I didn't like the LSX, well, the ones that I heard, as like not nearly as much as I liked the LS50s, but that was also like the ones that I heard at their facility, right? So I don't know how they actually perform. Yeah, like Joel, I would actually get, if I were buying speakers today, like for myself even, I would just get those 306p Mark IIs or whatever the JBL ones are. I think the 306p Mark IIs. That's what I would get because they're cheap and they perform well enough, and it's like it might not have like some of the characteristics of the Kefs, but I think it's at least as linear. I right? I think it's at least as linear. Oh, you have the 306p Mark IIs. Do you like them? I hope HPCom have more merch down the line. Things that are more clearly headphones.com branded rather than being generic audio designs. Yeah, we're actually working on merch. We have some. We have a mug. We have a shirt. We have a desk mat, which is a remarkably good desk mat. I like this sounds silly to talk about, but when I got it in, I was like, holy crap, this is so much nicer than I thought it was going to be. And we want to make more. Right now, Taryn has a lot of unhinged ideas. He wants to put riblob on something, and if anybody knows what riblob is, you'll know that's he wants to put it on a toque or on socks. But yeah, move out to the valley, dude. I was out that way last week. I was actually over at the LTT Labs place, which is it's in Surrey. It's in like the it took me like a while to get there from where I am. But yeah, I remember thinking like, man, this is out of the middle of the sticks here, like on the farmland. I don't know if I'd call that Fraser Valley exactly. Well, I'm doxing you, I guess, but sorry. I wouldn't exactly call that the valley, but it's further. It's probably closer in terms of time spent to get there to you than it is to me. How do your neighbors like your stereo system? See, this is what I'm worried about. Like, I don't know. I do want to get a subwoofer, but I'm worried that that's gonna, damage that relationship. Because yeah, it's a small apartment, right? So. Let's keep going. E3 is nice, but you have to get them sat right on your ear. Yes, that is the other thing, that if you have them in maybe the more comfortable position, the sound is not ideal. So you need to move them down and forward so that this is kind of close to the back. Yeah, that would be another thing where I think they could maybe consider some way of improving it, but I don't know how you would approach that. Okay, this is another thing for me. I have a big head, but like, I don't find them that comfortable. Like, they clamp a bit. All the DCAs do, and it has to do with the Nidinal headband being like tensioned a bit too tightly for my giant dome. How do you compare the ZMF Auteur to Atrium and Aeolus? I have heard all three of them, but I have not done that comparison. But for the sound signature, I like the Auteur best. That's my favorite for the sound signature for all of them. Atrium sounded more. My issue with the Atrium is that the upper mids got to me a bit. Like, they're a bit too strong for my ear. Where the Auteur, I think, the transition between the upper mids and treble is a bit like, there's a bit more balance there for me. So yeah, I would say Auteur is my favorite for the sound signature, but it might be that the Atrium is more subjectively better because I have not heard them side by side, so I can't say that. So you're just into headphone and headphone amps or full size systems as well? In my space, it doesn't make sense for me to get like a crazy, full size speaker set. I mean, like speakers like near field or bookshelf speakers of some kind at a subwoofer. That's probably the extent. for my current space. I have heard many high-end systems. Like I've heard systems that are like $500,000. Um, Not all systems that are expensive are good. In fact, many of them are not. Just put it that way. Some of them, though, that I've heard have been remarkable. You want me to move to Calgary? I'd move to Kananaskis. Find me somewhere. Find me like some sort of like cheap farmland in Kananaskis. How do you manage your listening switching between headphones and IEMs? My head goes crazy because IEMs are sitting so close to the eardrums it takes days to adjust back to headphones. No, it's pretty straightforward for me, to be honest. What's my take on determinism and free will? Is this a Sam Harris bait? Because I'm actually inclined to agree with him on free will. I think that there is no such thing as free will, in the sense that we are all a byproduct of our environment and our biology, which we don't really have much agency over. So yeah, like we definitely have that feeling of choice, for things. I could have done something else today, but I didn't. But the idea that I have an infinite choices in front of me that are equally likely for me to choose and for whatever. I don't think that that's the case because of, again, environment and biology. So we are ultimately the product of environment and biology, and as a result are going to be more likely to trend in one direction or another, and we will always have made those choices, right? That's the thinking behind that. The only thing that kind of I still have an issue with that concept is like, that's fine for like big choices and big decisions. But what about like, should I have peanut butter or jam or both? The things that are like totally innocuous that have no, like there's no consequence to those choices, right? Like, or just like, the random things, right? Where you're like, it doesn't feel like there was any thought that was put into this. It might still be the case that those are, again, products of biology and environment, right? Like we would have always done that as the thoughts arose in our heads. But I kind of think that there is a point at which it's so arbitrary that it doesn't matter, if that makes sense. Like, again, it's not to say that the thinking there is wrong or the theory is wrong. It's just that it's not even an illusion of choice because you're never thinking about it. You're never like, you're never gripped with, trepidation about, like what maybe some people are. I don't want to say that you're not, but like, do I want eggs for breakfast or, toast with jam? Like, you're not, these are choices that don't really matter that much. And, yeah. I don't really know how to kind of wrap my head around the illusion of choice when it comes to those kinds of things. Or sorry, the illusion of free will, because it's like, yeah, that might still be an illusion, but like I'm not sat there. It doesn't keep me up at night, Coaxial directivity. Oh, you don't like coaxial directivity for the 306p Mark IIs? I don't know how much there is for the coincident versus coaxial thing, like the point source. But one thing I do notice though with the kefs is, and I didn't notice it originally, but I've noticed over time that now, like, there are situations where I can be watching a movie and somebody like knocks on the door or makes a sound that's supposed to come out of like the left channel, and it sounds like there's someone at my door, and I'm like, what the fuck? Like, it's unnerving in a sense. So, and that's not something that I've gotten from other speakers, and I don't know if that's to do with the wide dispersion that they have, or if that's to do with anything special about the point source stuff. Yeah, but it's interesting. Your LSX2s need a sub. Rel T. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that sub, but I definitely want a sub for my LS50s. The Kali speakers also seem quite good. Yeah, I saw Aaron's review on one of those not that long ago. I think it was Aaron's. It looks pretty good. I haven't heard them though. Campfire Supermoons are good. I feel like I did hear them along like not. I'm not at Canjum, New York, but at some point. When did they come out? I thought they came out like a year ago. Or maybe I'm thinking of something else. Anyways, I heard one of the campfires and it was better than what I was expecting. Let's see. Has anyone tried the Vanity Transparent 1 Encore Plus? I have not tried the Plus, but I have tried the Transparent 1 Encore. Did not like it. Don't think it's very good. I think it's fine for the size, and they're very small, dense, and you get a lot of functions out of it, so that's good. And they do go reasonably low, but as far as I did not enjoy those. But I think maybe the Plus, they fixed the issues that I had. Like, to me, it sounded almost kind of like muffled in certain parts of certain regions of the frequency response. And I think with the Plus, they may have improved that. $500,000 sound system is insane. Must be insanely wealthy. So yeah, some folks are. I've heard systems. I mean, the part of this is like it shows. Like if you ever go to like the Munich high end show, like those shows are crazy, and the prices for that stuff is truly exorbitant. But I've also like been to, like, I've gone on like factory tours at various different places, and then they, for media and public, I'm not sure who would from the public would go there, but like they have these sort of like demo rooms where they like set them up with like the best that they possibly have. And I think actually the one system at KEF was like that, where it was, I think it cost some crazy amount. I don't remember exactly. And then I've been to the one, I've heard the Focal, their high end Utopias, which they sound crazy, but I actually think I prefer the sound of one of the like lower down ones, the Utopia Evo. I can't remember exactly the name of it. I think I like those better than the Grand Utopias, but like it could be also the space that they have them in, so I'm not sure. Oh, I do remember at Munich High End was they had those Evos in like set up in their booth, and their booth was packed from start to finish. Like you could barely get in to listen to them, because everybody wanted to listen to them. So those were, if I were to get one of those crazy high end ones, maybe it would be one of those. But there's no scenario where I'll ever be able to afford that. I am quite content with the KEFs. I don't need anything crazy for speakers, because again, for me with the speakers, it's like they need to be good enough, and they need to be, convenient. But I'm not spending my waking moments listening to speakers that much. It's when I'm just hanging out in my living room, or doing the dishes or whatever. Which you're afraid to try Campfire? Depends which one, right? Because they can be very hit and miss. Like the Andromeda, I think people like. I like I used to own the original Andromeda. But then some of the other releases they have, it's like the tuning is just bonkers, right? So probably depends which one you end up trying. Okay, here we go. If there is no free will, where are the grounds for culpability? I think that's kind of his point. That as soon as you really sort of internalize that concept, you can still hold people accountable. You can still say, okay, like this is, you did this bad action thing, and therefore we're going to, ensure that your behavior is you're not gonna have this behavior in the future, and the ways that we're going to do that are X, Y, and Z. But what falls out of that, what goes away, is the idea of like retribution, right? Like, so the idea of like, I need to get my pound of flesh because you wronged me in this way. And I think that that's weirdly part of how some, like, it's some of the more like new age, there's a term for this. Some of the more new age, like they seem to me to be more like ultra sophisticated conflict resolution centers. But that's how I would describe them. But what they do is they basically take, like, if you commit a crime, say you murder someone, right? You are not wrong. You are harming the family, but you haven't done in the eyes of the law wrong to the family. You've done something wrong in the eyes of the state, and so then you go to prison, which is a state thing, right? Or a not states as in like specific states, but like, you get what I mean, right? Like, you have that to deal with, but the actual people who are wronged by your actions are not the ones who ever get that sense of closure, right? As a result, somebody let me know the word for this. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying this is something that people are talking about, and that they're doing. But there are basically programs in place that try and reconnect the victim of whatever crime to the perpetrator, to try and talk through and make amends, and for the perpetrator to make amends, so that the victims actually get closure out of this, rather than it just being a relationship, a criminal relationship with the state. And so that is a little bit in line with this idea of like, the retribution is, it goes away. It sort of falls out of the picture, because as soon as you realize, like, they would have always done this, they would have not done this otherwise. Like, yeah, we have to correct the behavior, of course we do, but it's sort of nonsensical to then feel that you need to go after them equally for that, or in some way, restorative justice. That's it. Thank you. Yeah. Again, it's a novel concept, right? But and I'm not saying that this is something that I would, fully endorse as like, instead of, criminal justice or some other kind of justice system. But certainly, in addition, there are people who've been helped by that. The purpose should be corrective, not punitive. Yeah. That's kind of the idea, I think. But anyways, yeah, I think the whole free will thing is a difficult one to really like wrap your head around, because it does feel like we have choice, right? Like, it does when you're, making, especially the more significant decisions in your life, you are not thinking that this is something you have no agency over. And there is a sense in which, as soon as you kind of recognize that, like, your biology and environment are ultimately going to lead you to a certain choice no matter what, and you will always have made that choice, there is something weird about that, like, self-recognition, right? Like, that sort of like, you've broken the illusion, broken the spell of free will and choice. And what do you do with that information? Like, what do you do now? And do you feel like, none of the consequences matter? And I think that Harris's point on this is that the choices actually matter more because of this. And that's another part that I don't quite see how the choices matter more. I can certainly see how the choices still matter. But yeah, I'm not sure that they matter more. So if you wouldn't spend more than 1K on IEMs, what's the limit for speakers, assuming it's for normal bedroom size space? I mean, again, it depends on what you want to do with speakers. And for me, the convenience of those kefs is, it's well worth it. Like, being in my space, the way that I have them set up, and for what I'm doing, it's great, but for what I would recommend to a person, if you don't need something wireless, I would just recommend those 306p Mark IIs. I think they measure like the frequency response is very similar. So I don't. They might not have the same dispersion, but it's good enough. Like, it doesn't need to be like that crazy point source thing. Resolve should tell us what headphones are best for StarCraft 2. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I mean, something not too bassy, because you don't want, the auditory cues to be. But like, even still, I can play that game on mute. Like, I listen to music when I'm playing, so whatever headphones or IEMs are best for music are the ones that are best for StarCraft. I play StarCraft so that I, like, these days it's like I play it to relax, to get into that kind of flow state, listen to music, or listen to podcasts or something. And so for that, I want to focus, like my attention goes to the music, and I want that to sound good. Whereas what I'm doing in the game is kind of like just muscle memory, flow state kind of stuff, if that makes sense. It's very difficult to do after edibles. So that's my challenge at the end of the day is, see how far I can get, how many wins I can get while the edibles are kicking in. You guys got him talking about free will now. It's game over. Yeah. Robert Sapolsky? No, I was talking about Harris. But like that was just an example of I think it's fun to think about that kind of stuff. I'm not necessarily saying that I would endorse his entire viewpoint on that particular subject, but I do think he's right about environmental biology. I think that like those are the things that are the most influential in our decision making, and that the idea of like choice being an even playing field just doesn't make sense, or free will being like an even playing field does not make sense. People really hate hearing that they don't have free will. Yeah, and I get why, because usually it's because of some religious thing, right? Like because of or even like some Cartesian type of argument about like God wouldn't deceive me or something like that. But that's not the direction that I go with the free will thing. There are other reasons why the whole concept of free will is a bit of an illusion. Oh, okay, Matt. Okay, I see. Yeah, no, I'm not talking about him. Blame our outrageous audio spending habits on the fact that we don't have free will. You were always gonna buy that $1,000 IEM. If we choose to be peaceful, it becomes part of the context for others' actions. Yeah. Yeah, like I think there is a consequentialist view that you can take towards that, right? And you can say, well, the actions, your choices really do matter, even though free will is itself is an illusion. Based on the outcome specifically, like what the outcome is. But I still think like once once you break the spell, things get weird in that whole analogy, because now suddenly you like the idea of retribution goes away if somebody wrongs you. But what if you're faced with a difficult choice where it's like, do I wrong this person? Do I wrong this person? Right? Or say you are faced with, something that makes your life incredibly easy, but is particularly difficult for somebody else or harmful for somebody else. And you are aware that, this whole free will thing is an illusion. So Does guilt fall away, right? Do some of these more like self yeah uh the self does something, well, I don't know if I'd call it reflexive, but uh aspects to do with self knowledge, does that change? I don't know. No free will, born to love JM1, forced to love Harmony 2019. There is no 28. Well, it'd be 2017 and 2019. If it's predetermined, luck doesn't play into it. Then you can go down a rabbit hole of what is right. Yeah, you can get into meta ethics. The question of why be moral. Yeah, you can have all kinds of fun with that. So yeah, I never did moral philosophy. Well, I did do meta ethics and some moral philosophy, but like it was not my focus. I did. I focused more on perceptual theory and epistemology, so like theory of knowledge and stuff like that. That I love epistemology. I could talk about that forever. And I did some jurisprudence, and I did some distributive justice. And distributive justice is also quite fun. But, well, fun. It's interesting. That is some far more practical applications than what a lot of the rest of it is. Like the perceptual theory stuff is more just like, how do we think about knowledge statements and what, like, how, you know. But I'll give you an example of where epistemology is highly relevant in our lives and in my life. So the example is, well, there's two examples. I'm not sure which one I want to go with. There's the example of contextualism, which is probably the most straightforward example. Have you ever walked outside of your house with someone and you're not thinking about, you know, the fact that, you know, you had tea this morning and whether or not you left the kettle on. But as soon as somebody asks you, hey, do you know if you left the kettle on? You suddenly don't know. You're suddenly less sure about that. And so the knowledge statement that you might have internally, or even if you're talking to somebody about it ahead of time, might be, I know that I turned the kettle off before I left the house. But as soon as they put some doubt into that and you don't know, the truth value of that knowledge statement can change. And so this is interesting, because what it actually, once you kind of run that to its conclusion, it actually reveals to you that most of the time when you are saying, I know X, or they know, or, you know, this person knows X, or, you know, something is something else, this is true, this is false, those types of things, that's just loose talk. You don't actually know, because as soon as you change the context to create doubt in there, you don't have certainty. And so there's something called subject sensitive invariantism. And basically what that is to say that if you raise the stakes to a sufficient degree, to a point where, say, a family member's life hinges on your statement, your knowledge attribution here, you're basically not going to be sure until you can know with certainty. And all of that is to say that most of the time when we're talking about, like, you know, things that we are sure of, or, you know, things that we assume to be factual, it's just loose talk and we don't actually know. And so I suppose one of the more interesting things about this and what this reveals about knowledge is that there is a sort of feathering around certainty, right? Or around the concept of knowledge, where if we have some, you know, loose idea of it, we are very, you know, quick to, you know, put that in the category of, you know, knowledge attribution or knowledge statement. But that doesn't actually mean that you know, once you strip away the you know, the loose talk, right, it doesn't mean that, you know, a knowledge statement has actually occurred. Another one that I like is about my favorite thing in epistemology is uh, it has to do with um, it's called Gettier cases, and I see this in audio all the time. But it basically has to do with being right about something for the wrong reasons. Um, Now, as it relates to knowledge, it's a bit more complicated. But what's fun about it is you can see people being right for the wrong reasons in audio all the time, and so that's one of my favorite little touch points there. But a Gettier case is basically that like the traditional definition of knowledge is justified true belief, and you can technically satisfy that criteria with luck, and intuitively once we are aware of this, the fact that it's luck or chance or whatever, um, it doesn't feel like actual knowledge. And so the example that gets given is the barn facade example, where imagine you are driving down a country road and you see a barn and you say, I know that's a barn. And now, as it happens, this is an area, and what you don't know is that this is an area full of barn facades. So it's like a two-dimensional thing that's meant to look like a barn, but isn't actually a barn. But the one that you point to and say, I know that's a barn, happens to be a real barn and not a barn facade. And if you'd pointed to any of the other ones, you would have been wrong. But because you just by chance, you pointed the one that was actually a barn, your knowledge statement satisfies your justified true belief, right? So you're justified in it because it looks like a barn. It's true because it actually is a barn, and you also believe it to be a barn. So it satisfies all the requirements for knowledge, but because it's based on luck, intuitively that feels not quite like it counts. And to give you examples in audio, there was a reviewer who reviewed the Project Red on a particular Gross rig, and because of the way that Gross rig's this is going back to the Maya TL thing, because of the way that Gross rig functions, basically, which is different from the way that most other Gross couplers do, and different from the way that it was used in the Harman research. It actually ended up measuring closer to Harman than it did on other rigs. And as a result, this person said, oh, this IEM is very good because look at how closely it matches Harman, not recognizing that when measured on like other couplers, it was specifically not Harman. So they'd be right in thinking that, oh, this is a pretty good IEM. They'd be justified in that because they might listen to it and it sounds good to them, right? Or it measures like Harman, right? I'd say that's probably where they're justified. And it's true. It is a pretty good IEM. For I would say, I think a lot of people would say, and they believe it, but they got there for the wrong reasons. They got there just because of how they happen to be measuring it. So that's I mean, I wouldn't say that that's exactly the same setup as like other Gettier cases, but it takes a core concept of it that I find fun, which is people being right by accident. You like the clock example the best? There's also the one with the change in the pocket, which is a good example. That's a good one. Anyways, those are all. That's like I said, I lead a dull existence over here. When I'm not doing audio stuff, I'm spending way too much time on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. On that terrible disappointment, I think it is time to end. So thank you all for participating, and thank you all for your spicy takes. What are we going to end with? DMS. What are we going to end with? Nothing. Chaos. All right. Have a good weekend, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one. We'll have a video coming out tomorrow, I think, and then we'll have some more next week. And look forward to the Subtonic Storm review. Shoutouts to the community member who is letting me borrow this for the week. So, all right.